listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix. It is time once again for the show that brings you the truth, as twisted as it is today, behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. And it is a frosty Fridays. We're joined by guest co-host Mark Frost. You there, Mark?
I sure am. And guess what I'm doing? Ask me what I'm doing.
What are you doing?
I am trying to find out where I can see in the Court of the Crimson King documentary, which comes out sometime in March.
Yes, but it like comes out like on a streaming service, like Netflix or one of the...
I truly don't know. I think it's just a film, so probably at an art rock theater somewhere. So anyway.
Yeah, you know, we do actually have a sort of art theater. Downtown Sioux Falls, we got the State Theater. It's a great... last film I saw there was Easy Rider, and it was not in the 60s. It was just a few months ago. So that tells you what kind of theater it is, right?
Yeah, I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, it sounds very good. Okay, we'll be talking about that and more. And I got a question for you about easing, Mark. But let me introduce who's going to be on the show today. First off, in the first hour, out of Berlin, our friend, I believe he is. Rod, is he in Berlin today?
I believe so.
Okay, Peter Oliver, usually in Berlin. That's where you can usually find him. Peter Oliver will be joining us in the first hour. In the second hour, out of the UK, the great Ian Schilling will be joining us. So we got a great show planned for the end of the week, before the 3-day weekend. It's The Backstory. And speaking of Frosty Friday, let me just explain. I was talking to a friend of mine recently, Mark, and they said, what's the weather like in Sioux Falls in March? And I said to them, it's a complete toss-up. And I meant it. I said, you never know what it's like. So let me explain what the weather forecast is like this weekend, okay? Sunday is supposed to be 55 degrees. Sounds pretty nice, right? Then Monday, -4 and a blizzard. So I'm just saying, that's a 60-degree shift. That's a lot of temperature shift right there in a day for it to change 60 degrees. But that's the way South Dakota gets in the end part of the winter. You never know what's going to happen. It could be nice one day, spring-like, and then dead of winter the next day. And that's what we got coming up next week. So there we go. But anyway, how's the weather where you are in Georgia, Mark?
It is gray and cold and dry and dismal.
Nice. So it's kind of like that here in Sioux Falls. It's cloudy. It's 40-something degrees, which doesn't sound that bad. And it's kind of not that bad, except there's a wicked wind blowing. The wind is really, really blowing right now. Now, let me talk about the headlines that are going on right now.
Sure,
and I actually need your help to think through this one. And this, you can rely on your powers as an economist or your powers as an Eagle Scout, whatever powers you want to draw on. So in the Donetsk region, in the Donbass, in eastern Ukraine, in the past couple of hours, a car bomb exploded. Okay? And I've seen the footage. It's clear that some kind of car bomb did explode there. Now, here's the problem. The U.S. has been saying Russia was going to do a false flag. And now I'm seeing people on Twitter saying, see, here's the Russian false flag. But here's where it gets tricky. If you're Russia and you were planning to do a false flag, and the U.S. is out talking about you doing a false flag, do you do a false flag? Do you see what I'm asking?
Well, even worse, if you do a false flag, that's basically two negatives and you've created a positive.
Right. So here's what I'm saying. Pretend you're, for a second, a terrorist leader. Just go with me. Pretend for a second you're a terrorist leader, and you're in that area, and you want to wreak havoc, because that's what you do for a living as a terrorist leader, right? I would say when the U.S. has said Russia's going to do a false flag, if it were me sitting around the terrorist leader meeting, I'd raise my hand and I'd go, hey, guys, I think it's a really good time for us to do something, because we know Russia's going to get blamed for it. Does that make sense?
It's certainly plausible. I mean, you know, if you just look back at the history of the countries involved, it's not like they're not without their own subterfuge, you know?
Well, and here's the problem. Usually the false flag thing comes up second. In other words, what I mean by that is usually there's an event, something happens. There's a shooting, there's a bombing, there's something, right? And then people say, see that thing that happened? That was a false flag.
Yeah, I mean, there's books on logic with a whole chapter in that.
Now what they've done is the United States has done something I think new. It's like those credit cards where they say you're pre-approved, right? You're pre-approved for a false flag. That's what they're saying, basically.
No,
they're like,
I have to teach you a trick of the trade on this one. There's a difference between being pre-selected and being pre-approved.
No, okay, go ahead. Explain the difference.
You'll rarely see offers that say pre-approved. If you're pre-approved, you get a card. Doesn't matter. If they send you a truly pre-approved offer, then that's pre-approved. Now, you may only get a $500 limit or something, but yeah, you're going to get that card, because courts have ruled that pre-selected is not the same thing as pre-approved. Pre-approved means you have the right to send that. They have to give you a credit card, basically.
Well, so what I'm saying is the U.S., Tony Blinken was out yesterday. He made a statement, I think it was yesterday, in front of the UN, saying Russia's going to do a false flag and it may be a terror attack. I would say he falls into the pre-approved category, because he's saying there's going to be an attack and it's going to be fake. It's going to be Russia doing it. So if I were a real terrorist, I would use that and I would go, we've got a freebie here. In other words, we can do something, and they're going to blame Russia for it, because they've already blamed Russia for it. They did pre-approve them. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I think I'm accurate. It's good to know on the pre-selected thing, so people don't fall for that as consumers. But the problem is...
Well, the reason that I brought that up, and the reason that that's relevant, is logic is the only way that you can decipher this type of information that comes out. Else, all you're going to do is just emotionally hyperbolate it. I mean, that's all you... I mean, the goal is to come to some sort of rational judgment and a reasonable, pragmatic way to move forward. That's kind of the roles of rationality in our life. And
well, the other thing I think you can do is some first principles. So, in other words, is there anything we know is true? Going into this, is there anything we know is true? And I think there is some stuff we know is true. We know that in that Donbass region, there's been a conflict between Ukrainian-backed forces and other forces that want to break away from Ukraine, right? That's for sure. I don't think that's doubted at all. And we also know, because I've seen reports in the papers, and they're not negative reports, they're just factual reports saying that the British, for instance, have been giving weapons to the Ukrainians to use in the Donbass. Okay? So that seems to me to be airtight, that the UK, for instance, has been giving weapons to Ukraine to fight in eastern Ukraine against people who are Ukrainian, because that's what they are. They are Ukrainian. Some of them have become Russian dual citizens, because about 700,000 plus people apparently have taken Russia up on that offer. But what I'm saying is, for sure, there's a conflict going on. Let's take a look at 9/11, for instance. At 9/11, it was not the case on 9/10, my birthday, by the way. It was not the case on 9/10 that the World Trade Center was at war with Al-Qaeda. Does that make sense? Like the World Trade Center had not declared war on Al-Qaeda at any point. We're going to get you. Does that make sense, Mark?
Sure. I think that would be a reasonable technical assertion.
So what I'm saying is there's some sort of conflict going on in eastern Ukraine. And there have been terror acts that don't seem to be false flags in the past. Therefore, I'm saying there are some terrorists in that area. There are people at conflict, and I'm not even right now taking sides. I'm just saying there's an ongoing conflict. So because there's an ongoing conflict, when the U.S. jumps in and says, hey, there's going to be a false flag attack, it seems to me to be a really weird thing to do, because it would seem to me like you're almost giving the green light for terrorism. That's the argument I'm making.
Well, in a way you are, because think about what a false flag is. All a false flag is a type 1 error. But if you don't make a type 1 error, then you, by definition, had to have made a type 2 error. And so the reason that's important in logic is the type of error that we're about to make is critical. So, for instance, if Russia invades Ukraine and takes it over, we'll have objective data to look at and say, okay, this is what happens after Russia invades and takes Ukraine over. But what we don't have objective data over is, guess what? Russia didn't invade and didn't take the Ukraine over. And
right.
And that's what we don't know. It's those epistemological things that we tend to confuse what we know with what we have a hunch about. And sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong. But it's the introduction of logic. If someone took a logic class, the first hour would be spent on just at a high level. How do you know something?
And the problem is, on certain things, the raw information is not sufficient, because the data itself can point to multiple conclusions. Does that make sense?
Completely.
And I think it's one of those things that's very tricky here. So the headline is that there's been a car bomb in Donetsk, and that the U.S. is continuing to say a Russian invasion is imminent, even though they mentioned a date. The intelligence community had mentioned Wednesday is the date. That didn't happen. But, it reminds me, and Tarif, I'll get to you in 1 second. It reminds me, there was a book, Penn and Teller, the magicians, wrote a book, and they were talking about, for instance, mind readers and people like that, who are fortune tellers, that kind of thing. And so if you go to a fortune teller, let's say you're sick, right? What they said was there's basically three possibilities, logically. You're going to get better, you're going to get worse, or you're going to stay the same. You follow me? That seems like that would pretty much cover all the options, right? If you're sick, you're going to get better, worse, or you'll stay the same. Does that make sense, Mark? Am I missing an option there?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
Right. And they said, therefore, since those are your three options, if the person gets worse and dies, let's say, well, they're no longer a client, right? So from game theory perspective, saying that they'll get better is your best move, right? Because if they get worse, they've got bigger things on their plate than going to a fortune teller at that point. They're worse. But if you say to them, if you're a fortune teller and you say, I see you improving, that's your best move, game theory wise. Right, Mark? Practically speaking, would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because, when somebody tells you that there may be, that's like the unnamed source, right, in journalism. There may be someone that maybe has information that is incriminating against you. Well, great. There may be against me. That's a true statement about anyone. And yeah, so
we'll see what's happening in Donetsk, and we'll see. But people are already, because the U.S. has already put out that it's going to be a false flag. Some people are already saying it's a false flag, except they're no longer in the, as another journalist pointed out, Alex Jones territory. They're now, that's the reputable thing to say. Oh, see, it's a false flag. That's the establishment line, because our government's put that out as the line. So it's very interesting. 202-521-1320. Let's go to Tarif. Tarif, thanks for waiting. What's on your mind right now?
Thank you, gentlemen, for taking my call. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange. I have two comments. My first comment is this. The reason why they find out who's given to the trucker thing in Canada is because with the cryptocurrencies, because people's using FTX, the foreign exchange. Don't use FTX. Don't get off the foreign exchange and use the, I think they call hard wallets, the wallets for cryptocurrencies. People been using it for at least 10 years or more, which is somewhat hard to trace to a point. You get that, you get your Ethereum or your Bitcoin, and you transfer that over to Monero. Then, from what I understand, then you start taking out cash or converting it or whatever. That's how you do it. That's what it's going to make it very hard for them to track that and block it. That's what I heard on the Duran and some other analysts. My second comment is this. I'm going to try to bring this together. Biden might get a boost because Russia might be forced to hit Ukraine once Ukraine attacked the Donbass region. Of course, the media is going to say, yeah, we told you so, and Biden might get a boost in the polls. But over time, this was going to happen. Mark Frost knows this. Because we got high mortgage rates, we got this gas crisis where the barrel of oil is going up to $100 a gallon to maybe $150. Once that they put sanctions on Russia and spook people on the market, that's going to create economic problems, not just in Europe, but in the United States. Well, the price of gas is going, like in New Orleans, well, we're paying $3.29 right now. It's going to skyrocket to $4.29, maybe $5.29 once we get to 150 barrels a gallon, because the conflict, they're going to sanction Nord Stream 2. That's going to create problems for Europe, and you're going to have it's going to affect different things. I know Mark know how to break this down, but Joe Biden, look, Russia don't have to invade Ukraine. All they have to do is stop the armor push of destroying armor equipment and anti-aircraft missiles. Then they bring them down to the same level as the rebels that's in eastern Ukraine, having the same equipment as them, and the Donetsk region can handle the rest. Russia don't really have to invade. You understand? You see what I'm saying? All they have to do is just the blitzkrieg, and that's it. They don't have to invade. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. Great call as usual, Tarif. And again, I don't think Russia's planning to invade. They've been very clear about that, and I agree with you. Even the Donetsk, they can hit that. They can do things other than an invasion, because I don't think they want to. Once you invade, you've got to hold ground, and I don't think they want to try to do that. But if they can just put a stop to some of the things in the conflict, and especially get Ukraine back to the table and get the Minsk, they keep bringing up the Minsk agreement. That's what they want followed. So we'll see what happens. But now the thing that he said you know about, Mark, is the energy stuff. Do you think, is oil rising, and is it going to affect gas prices? Because that's political disaster for Biden. Is that coming? What say you, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. It isn't coming. It's already here. All you got to do is look at the derivatives markets on oil. Just do a Google on futures oil prices, and that'll get you where you need to go. But it's the futures market where the commodity spot prices are set for between now and the next 90 days in the supply chain scheme of things. And if you keep playing around with the economy so that for half of Americans, oil is the most expensive thing that they consume. It's the most expensive thing that they consume now. And it's just going to drive them crazy. And I think it's going to reassociate a process that's already happening between Democrats and Republicans. I'm an economist, not a political scientist, but it feels like, to me, like we have kind of a rearrangement of the of the liberal and the Republican parties.
Well, that's true in a number of ways, but what do you first off, just practically speaking, if you were to guess, Tarif threw out that it could raise gas by $1 a gallon. Do you think that's conceivable, or is that doomsday?
No, it's not doomsday, but it definitely hammers the people least able to be hammered. Because that's the inflation that really hits people hard, because it's an inflation that poorer people pay more of because they're buying things that are affected by the inflation that are necessities. If you have a little kid, you're going to buy formula or milk, regardless of the price, and then you'll cut back on other things. So that's the concept of it. And I don't completely understand. This is I understand Russia's strategy. I could create a game theoretic class right now in my head, rush to the university and teach it, and I'd have all the matrix in my head on how to do that. I understand Russia. I even understand Ukraine's game in this. What I do not understand is the United States's. That's what I'm struggling, and all I can do is say it's incompetence. I used to think it was this grand, brilliant strategy where they were coordinating all these, pillars of the economy into one, turnable key, and they're not. It just looks like they might be doing that because everybody's scared, but there's a lot of incompetence going on right now.
Well, okay, so let me bring up something since we're talking about incompetence. I brought up the other day, and I'll use the word again, but I'll use it in a different context. Inbreeding. And what I said was, we were talking about this in the show, and I said one of the things that it does go on with the elites is, if you look at it, royalty, for instance, everyone knows there's actual inbreeding. But let me use the term in another sense. That when you get in your own echo chamber, and the only people you're dealing with, I'm not talking about actual inbreeding, I'm talking about a kind of inbreeding where, let's say you're at the State Department and you're inside your own echo chamber, right? And you might not see how badly things are going, because the people you talk to, things seem to be going okay. Or
right, it's the Hitler bunker phenomenon, you know?
Yeah, now explain that.
Well, I mean, at the end, it was dramatized in that great movie that's now become a meme. But basically, he had it in his mind. He was going to retaliate and counterattack with all these battalions and regiments that he just didn't have. And because nobody bothered to tell him that the things that had been done in the past didn't work out as good as they were supposed to. And it's like you were saying, it's a big, giant echo chamber.
And see, I think that's part of the incompetence that's going on. Because what triggered this in my head was you brought up incompetence. I think that very clearly, the fact that they put out Russia's going to invade on Wednesday, and that nobody in the government said, hey, maybe we don't want to actually put out a solid date. Maybe we don't want to give that to the Washington Post or whoever. Because if they don't invade on Wednesday, we'll look bad.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Of course it does. In fact, watch any grift movie, and that's kind of, sight and sound. They just kind of get people's perception away from what they should be looking at, and they become disjointed from reality. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting type of incompetence we have right now, because I do think it's, you know what I'm saying? Yes, it's incompetence, but part of what we saw in Afghanistan, it wasn't so much military incompetence. It looked like it in one sense, but it wasn't really. It was intelligence confidence. They've said this now. In retrospect, we didn't know how quickly the Taliban would take over. That's an intelligence failure. It wasn't like they knew.
Of course we knew that. There was academic lectures going on at the time talking about that. Of course they knew it was being discussed.
But see, that's what I'm saying. I think they knew it, but they were inside their own echo chamber bubble. But when we come back, we'll be going to Peter Oliver, and Peter Oliver knows a lot about a lot, so we'll talk to him about stuff right after this, Mark, on a Frosty Friday here on The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we're back on the backstory, and we actually have breaking news right now. Joe Biden, President of the United States, is about to go live to talk about Ukraine. Maybe he was listening to the show. I'm skeptical about that, but he is going to be going live. So we're going to cut to Joe Biden when he comes on and starts talking. Peter Oliver is on in the background. He can't talk right now. He's been muted. Don't worry, it's not by YouTube or anybody. It's by Saul, our multifaceted engineer. And that's because for technical reasons, Peter's being muted. But Peter will be listening to Joe Biden with us, and we'll talk about it afterwards. So that's what's happening, Mark. We're about to hear from Joe Biden. It's exciting, isn't it?
It is.
And it's exciting, and yet, you know, I'm somewhat trepidatious because I think this is Joe Biden's moment of, you know, saying it's on. That's what I think this is going to be. He's going to say things have started, things are underway. And we'll see how much things are underway. But we'll see what he has to say. We're just waiting. He's going to come on. Are we still waiting, Saul?
Yeah, we're still waiting.
No Joe Biden.
On soon.
Yes.
No Joe Biden. But you can ask Peter Oliver a short question if you want.
Okay, let me just start with, how you doing, Peter? How's it going?
I'm all right. We have a hurricane here in Berlin, so you know, everything is a little strange right now. But yeah, as long as the roof doesn't blow off my house and I don't end up halfway to Kansas or not in Kansas anymore, I can't quite remember how that works. Everything should be fine. Interested to see what Joe Biden has to say. We are getting news coming through at this end that there has been an agreement that there'll be a meeting between, at least for the US side, is saying that there's going to be a meeting between Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, and Sergei Lavrov at some point next week. I've heard the 23rd. Interesting enough, that's Russian Army Day. But I've also heard that meeting is very much dependent, as far as the US are concerned, on there not being any invasion or any escalation. So whether Joe Biden has seen something different happen today since that news has come out, because what we've also seen occur in literally the last few minutes is news coming through to our team that there's been an explosion in Luhansk and a gas pipeline. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. I'm watching pictures from RIA Novosti, the Russian news agency. Very far away, the pictures, but you can certainly see something certainly it looks like an explosion lighting up the night sky in what it claims to be. It says is Luhansk. It looks like Luhansk. It must well be. So yes, there are certainly things happening both in the evening time here in Europe and of course in the afternoon there in the US. I would think a meeting between the US and Russian sides would be wise at the moment. Of course, it is Munich Security Conference time. Usually this would be the time I'd be incredibly busy running around in the Bavarian capital, but we're not invited this year. No, most of the press aren't. It's not just an RT thing. Most of the press aren't because of COVID. They allowed the big wigs to come back this year, but the press, the hoi polloi, we've been kept away. So I've had to watch on a digital feed all through the day. But usually you would have Russia meeting with the US at these events. Russia didn't send a delegation this time. The Russian Foreign Ministry citing a number of reasons is how they put it, but they also said that it'd become pretty much a transatlantic talking shop and they weren't interested in being talked at. So if they weren't going to get that meeting during Munich Security Conference, there pretty much has to be, you would have thought, a meeting organised elsewhere, and that seems to be what's been organised so far. Whether Joe Biden has anything else to say on that, we're going to have to keep an eye on it.
Well, let me just also say, let me say this about the pipeline thing. If I were Russia and I were planting a false flag that I was going to use, this is the United States narrative, is that Russia's planting a false flag to then use that as justification to attack. I would do something more than a pipeline attack, because it does not seem to me like a country would go to war over a pipeline bombing. Does that make sense?
Yes, but it what you have at the moment is a lot of very, very tense and very scared people at the moment, and the idea that you have had the message going round from leaders in the Donbass region, in the separatist regions in Donbass and Donetsk and Lugansk, warning about a full-scale assault, basically, is what they're frightened of, what they say they're frightened of coming from the Ukrainian side. From the Ukrainian side, they're, of course, saying that the false flag attack is going to be used by the Russians in order to is an excuse to launch an invasion. So things are very much as tense as it gets, and things have started over much less than an explosion in a pipeline. You have to remember.
Let me ask you something about that, though, Peter. From the Russia side, try to look at this from the Russian side. Russia's made it clear that they feel they don't see. Here's what I'm trying to get at. I don't understand why Russia would think they need a false flag attack. Russia's made it clear that they've got sufficient reason for their own security, if they wanted to launch any kind of offensive against Ukraine. Russia's already got plenty of reason to do that. Am I correct? It's not like Russia's going, just one more thing and that's it. They don't need one more thing as far as Russia's concerned. They think already there's enough going on. And the fact that the U.S. and NATO completely ignored Russian concerns, and Russia's been saying for weeks now. So I just don't. It seems to me like this line about a false flag attack is Western propaganda, because I don't see why the Russians would need that. Does that make sense, Peter?
It does, and I think another issue that does get overlooked an awful lot is that there are elements in eastern Ukraine, or who would like to see conflict in eastern Ukraine, coming from the Ukrainian side, who, this whole idea of there will be a false flag attack coming, that essentially gives them carte blanche to carry out whatever they would like. And we know that there's some incredibly unsavory elements that operate in those areas under the cover of, in fact, in some cases, working with the Ukrainian National Guard. And I'm thinking of the Azov Battalion in particular when I talk about that. But what you have is you still have a message coming out of Moscow that they want to have diplomatic solutions to this, and they want to have a Minsk solution to this. They still want to keep, they're still looking to the West, and still looking in particular towards not only the United States, but more in particular to the French and the Germans, to get the Ukrainians to listen to the Minsk agreement. That isn't seeming to be, well, as soon as things stray away from Minsk, as soon as things stray away from Ukraine being told that or Ukraine making moves towards adhering to Minsk, which would require a change of the Ukrainian constitution, which would really cause uproar among some circles in Ukraine. As soon as you move away from that, you start seeing more and more problems in the Donbass region. So if you get Ukraine closer to those talks about sticking to the Minsk agreement, things do tend to calm down a little bit. But yes, what I'm just reading a little thing as I'm speaking to you, trying to find out more confirmation about what's happened in Lugansk just now, but I'm also seeing more confirmation from the White House about Antony Blinken meeting with Sergei Lavrov on the 23rd. Yes, look, there's an awful lot going on, but there's an awful lot that is incredibly unclear what is happening, what's going on in the east of Ukraine at the moment, particularly in those Donbass region, in those separatist republics, and we need to be very clear about what we are seeing that's coming out, and make sure that panic doesn't. We're not propagating panic, because one of the things that has been really stark over the last few days, particularly from here in Germany, I mean, we've seen a multitude of complex attack plans that have been sent out across all kinds of media saying this is how the Russians are going to march on Kiev in the most outlandish and improbable attack plans that have ever been seen. That just, I mean, I'm no military tactician, but I will listen to those that are, and those that are would suggest that these plans just aren't, they couldn't be followed through upon. But so we do have to try and stay away from as much of that as possible. But for now, things are incredibly tense there at the moment. And I know colleagues of mine who were in Donetsk have heard explosions that have been going on. They have heard shelling that's been going on. And it does seem like the situation has deteriorated quite severely, and that's been borne out by what we've seen with the calls for an evacuation being issued by some of the leaders of those separatist republics, those breakaway regions, and basically saying that people should pull out of those regions and head towards Russia.
And I'm even seeing, I'm not saying it's a credible source, but when I was flipping through Twitter on this, somebody was saying that the shelling was done by the Russians, that the Russians, and at that point, that's crazy, right? I mean, but it's the kind of thing that you would see now, somebody spreading that kind of false thing.
Oh, this has gone beyond. I mean, it's gone beyond you just seeing some of that on Twitter, John. I mean, like it's Lee. Sorry, I beg your pardon. It's excuse me. This is now the narrative. It is. I mean, I was driving this afternoon and I had the radio on. I was listening to a station from the United Kingdom, and I was amazed at some of the stuff that I was hearing being passed off as fact. That yes, as you say, that it is Russia that is shelling those areas. I mean, it is undoubted that those areas do have the backing of Russia, that they did receive support from Russia, and that they, when they want to speak to the world, they have a tendency to go through Russia in order to do that. But the people carrying out the fighting there, and Moscow itself has been very keen to point out at every turn that this is a civil conflict in Ukraine, that these are Ukrainians that are fighting here. And that is one of the reasons why Minsk is so important, because Minsk would require Kiev to speak to the leaders of these separatist regions and try and find peaceful solutions there. That's one of the things that Kiev's unwilling to do at the moment. And once they are willing to do that, and I think if we are going to see some form of peaceful solution to this, and I would hope we would see some form of peaceful solution, I do actually believe we will still see some form of peaceful solution to it. They are going to have to hold those talks. It might not be pleasant how it gets to it, but it does need to happen. And you're completely right in what you're saying. You're saying a lot of this, that it is the Russians, the evil Russians that are doing all of this. But of course,
this would be roughly the equivalent if I said that truckers have disguised themselves as cops, and they're pulling truckers out of trucks up in Canada right now. It's absurd. It's crazy. But Peter, we got Mark Frost, it's Frosty Friday, co-hosting right now.
Excellent.
Mark, let me throw it over to you if you got any questions for Peter while we're waiting for Joe Biden to come on.
Well, yeah, I would agree with him as a historian in military economics. I would say that some of the things that has been alleged is just stupid. I mean, some of the things that I've read that are being planned in the invasion would be utterly ridiculous. It's not that hard to go get a reasonable argument of how an invasion might happen in the first place, but how people are talking about and this and that. What I get that disturbs me the most, it seems to me like there's players involved, both political parties and the media, and they're drooling at the bit. They want war so bad. There's there's a neocon-like attitude toward Russia that isn't just a Republican thing. This seems to be Democrat-driven, and I find it interesting that U.S. politics has mixed up and changed like that to the point where it seems to me we got Democratic hawks championing a lot of this.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Peter, any comments on what Mark's saying about how it's a bipartisan war lust going on in the U.S. right now?
Look, I would. I'm not going to come on a radio station in the U.S. and yank bash. But I was speaking to Willy Wimmer yesterday, who is the former Christian Democratic Union politician. I guess he would still say he is a CDU politician, but he was Secretary of State to Germany's defense minister back in the day, and he's been the vice president of the OSCE as well. And he basically said a lot of the problems that we have, not all of the problems that we have, but result from both Republican, Democratic presidencies, parties over the last 20 to 30 years have tried and attempted to kick Russia out of Europe, have tried to sideline Russia from European discussion, and that has not caused everything that we've had. That would be to completely oversimplify, but it has certainly not helped in the slightest with what we've seen going on. And we also had. I'm trying to remember, who did we have on the show? Who did we have talking to me? Lots of people have been speaking to me in the last few days. Looking ahead to the Munich Security Conference, but we've been digging back into, these people that were around, who were in the rooms in the 1990s, at the beginning of the 1990s, about those promises that were made, and who said what to whom, and and what did they exactly promise when it came to it, and we had Horst Telschik, who was, deputy head of the Chancellery of Helmut Kohl, telling us that, people were told there would be no missile systems deployed in Romania or Bulgaria. There would be no movement east, and that was not adhered to. That's always going to see any negotiations between Russia and NATO conducted from a point of view of suspicion. Now, that doesn't completely excuse everything from Russia, but what it does is give a dubious position when it comes to starting to trust your new partners, let's say, on the world stage, when the first crucial promise that you're made isn't met.
Now, let me ask you this, Peter, too, because you're in Germany, and we've not talked to you since this happened. What are you saying, Saul? Are you saying? Okay.
No, I didn't say anything. No.
We're still waiting on Biden, right?
Yeah. He was set to speak about 45 minutes ago.
Yeah, okay. So we're still waiting on Biden here. But, Peter, we haven't talked to you since Germany closed down RT, the German version of RT. Can you talk about that a little bit? What happened there? Did it affect you directly in any way?
It doesn't affect me directly. I work for RT International, but what we do have is a situation whereby basically RT Deutsch, RTDE, the German language sister channel of the one I work for, broadcasts out of Moscow. It does, basically the signal for that comes from Moscow. It's sent to Serbia, to Belgrade, and from Belgrade it's sent to Germany. That's because Serbia and Germany are all part of this big transfrontier agreement when it comes to broadcasting. The reason that they don't send the signal directly to Germany is because, or the reason they don't have it broadcasting from Germany is because you can't do that. You can't register in Germany because Germany won't allow any TV station that is in any way owned by a state to register in Germany. It's why most other stations that broadcast here, you're looking at things like in a German language, you're looking at anything France 24, not Deutsche Welle, of course, BBC World, anything like this, they will register in Luxembourg. Now, RTDE tried to do this. They were rebuffed in their attempts to do that. There is no smoking gun, but a lot of, we pretty much know, but we can't prove that there was a lot of pressure applied there by Angela Merkel's government as she was leaving to the Luxembourgers to say, don't give them the license. So they didn't give them the license. Now, what Germany says is happening is the RTDE Productions company, which is based in Berlin, which is a production company that produces segments and elements for RT Deutsch, that TV station, RTDE, that TV station that broadcasts out of Moscow. They say that is a TV station, and that's why they've shut it down. It's going to court. There's no other way to do it because they've said, we can't, as far as RT is concerned, they say we can't argue against the fact that we know we're broadcasting from Moscow. We know we're broadcasting, sending the signal to Serbia and then sending it to Germany. We know this is all legit. And the German side still said no. So it's going to court there. Of course, it resulted in a reaction from Moscow, and that Deutsche Welle had their accreditations pulled and their office closed in Moscow. Interesting to note that when Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, was in Moscow, the Deutsche Welle journalists were able to get accreditations for that. It's not wonderful at the moment, but it's going to the courts. And I think once it's going to the courts, it's probably best I don't say too much more about it.
No, yeah. No, let lawyers battle that one out. But, I will note, though, Germany has been, for instance, in that Navalny underwear radiation thing, that Navalny story, when Germany took in Navalny, Germany seems to have backed up the Navalny story without really providing much in the way of detail. Am I right? There's a lot of stuff they didn't provide, correct, Peter?
Yeah, well, there was evidence that seems to be crucial to the case that was requested by Moscow, that was not given over, that was shared by Germany with other nations from Germany, but never made public. And it hasn't. It says we've got this evidence, but you don't need to see it. Is one of those things, and we've heard that quite a bit from the U.S. playbook, particularly from the State Department of late, and the lad, I can't remember his name now. Is it Ned at the State Department?
Ned Price, yeah.
Yes, Ned Price, who comes out with his one of we've got evidence, but you don't need to see it. Trust us, we know what's happening. You don't need to see the proof. There's been a little bit of that about it, and it's one of the relationship between Germany and Russia is incredibly complex. It's on the surface quite a close relationship. There is a lot of intertwining when it comes to business. There's a lot of intertwining when it comes to culture. There's a lot of intertwining when it comes to history. But there are a multitude of very thorny issues when it comes to all kinds of stuff, from the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to Navalny, as you mentioned, to RTDE and the Deutsche Welle spat that's ongoing, to
okay, hey, Peter, Peter, we're getting word.
Biden take over.
Yeah. Joe Biden. Here's Joe Biden live.
I made two vital calls, as I've been making for some months now. Two vital calls that on the situation in Russia and Ukraine. The first was to a bipartisan group of members of Congress who are currently representing the United States, along with Vice President Harris at the Munich Security Conference. The second was the latest in a series of calls over the past many months with the heads of state of our NATO allies and the European Union, to bring them up to date on what the United States thinks is the current state of affairs and what's likely to happen in Ukraine in the coming days, to ensure that we continue to remain in lockstep, that is, the European Union and NATO. Despite Russia's efforts to divide us at home and abroad, I can affirm that has not happened. The overwhelming message of on both calls was one of unity, determination, and resolve. I shared with all of those on the calls what we know about a rapidly escalating crisis in Ukraine. Over the last few days, we've seen reports of a major uptick in violations of the ceasefire by Russian-backed fighters attempting to provoke Ukraine and the Donbass. For example, a shelling of a Ukrainian kindergarten yesterday, which Russia has falsely asserted was carried out by Ukraine. And we also continue to see more and more disinformation being pushed out to the Russian public, including Russian-backed separatists, claiming that Ukraine is planning to launch a massive offensive attack in the Donbass. Well, look, there is simply no evidence of these assertions, and it defies basic logic to believe the Ukrainians would choose this moment, with well over 150,000 troops arrayed on its borders, to escalate a year-long conflict. Russia's state media also continues to make phony allegations of a genocide taking place in the Donbass and push fabricated claims warning about Ukraine's attack on Russia without any evidence. That's just what I'm sure Ukraine's thinking of doing, attacking Russia. All of these are consistent with the playbook the Russians have used before, to set up a false justification to act against Ukraine. This is also in line with the pretext scenarios that the United States and our allies and partners have been warning about for weeks. Throughout these tense moments, the Ukrainian forces have shown great judgment and, I might add, restraint. They refused to allow the Russians to bait them into war. But the fact remains, Russian troops currently have Ukraine surrounded from Belarus along the Russian border and with Ukraine to the Black Sea in the south and all of its border. You know, look, we have reason to believe the Russian forces are planning to and intend to attack Ukraine in the coming week, in the coming days. We believe that they will target Ukraine's capital, Kiev, a city of 2.8 million innocent people. We're calling out Russia's plans loudly and repeatedly, not because we want a conflict, but because we're doing everything in our power to remove any reason that Russia may give to justify invading Ukraine and prevent them from moving. Make no mistake, if Russia pursues its plans, it will be responsible for a catastrophic and needless war of choice. The United States and our allies are prepared to defend every inch of NATO territory from any threat to our collective security as well. We also will not send troops in to fight in Ukraine, but we will continue to support the Ukrainian people. This past year, the United States provided a record amount of security assistance to Ukraine to bolster its defensive, $650 million from Javelin missiles to ammunition. We also previously provided $500 million in Ukraine and humanitarian aid and economic support for Ukraine. And earlier this week, we also announced an additional sovereign loan guarantee of up to $1 billion to strengthen Ukraine's economic resilience. But the bottom line is this: the United States and our allies and partners will support the Ukrainian people. We will hold Russia accountable for its actions. The West is united and resolved. We're ready to impose severe sanctions on Russia if it further invades Ukraine. But I say again, Russia can still choose diplomacy. It is not too late to de-escalate and return to the negotiating table. Or shut on diplomacy. They will have chosen war, and they will pay a steep price for doing so, not only from the sanctions that we and our allies will impose on Russia, but the more outrage the rest of the world will visit upon them. You know, there are many issues that divide our nation and our world, but standing up to Russian aggression is not one of them. The American people are united. Europe is united. The transatlantic community is united. Our political parties in this country are united. The entire free world is united. Russia has a choice between war and all the suffering it will bring, or diplomacy that will make a future safer for everyone. Now, I'm happy to take a few questions. Nancy from Bloomberg.
Thank you so much, sir. Do you think that it is wise for President Zelensky to leave Ukraine if an invasion is as imminent as the U.S. says it is?
That's a judgment for him to make and a determination as to whether or not. I've spoken with Zelensky a dozen times, maybe more, I don't know. And it's in the pursuit of a diplomatic solution, it may not be it may be the wise choice, but it's his decision.
And do you have any indication about whether President Putin has made a decision on whether to invade? Do you feel confident that he hasn't made that decision already?
As of this moment, I'm convinced he's made the decision. We have reason to believe that.
There seems to be a unanimity of spirit to do between the United States and Europe to do some sanctions, a comprehensive sanctions. But is everyone on board with the exact same sanctions that you want to do?
Yes. There will be some slight differences, but none. There'll be more add-ons than subtractions.
And President Putin is going to oversee some nuclear drills this weekend. How do you see that happening? What's your reaction to that, sir? Thank you.
Well, I don't think he is remotely contemplating nuclear, using nuclear weapons. But I do think it's, I think he is focused on trying to convince the world that he has the ability to change the dynamics in Europe in a way that he cannot. But I don't, how much of it is a cover for just saying we're just doing exercises and there's more than that, I just can't, it's hard to read his mind.
Mr. President, to be clear, you are convinced that President Putin is going to invade Ukraine. Is that what you just said a few moments ago?
Yes, I did. Yes.
So is diplomacy off the table then?
No, until he does, diplomacy is always a possibility.
What reason do you have to believe he's considering that option at all?
We have a significant intelligence capability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Well, that ended that quick. As soon as they asked for some proof, he got right out of there. Peter, what did you think of what President Biden had to say? Feel free to do some yank bashing here.
Look, there's, I think you've got to try and find some of the positives in what was an incredibly negative press conference. I think the idea that the diplomatic route remains open is always going to be there. He's always going to say, I still believe that Vladimir Putin is going to invade Ukraine, because if he was to say that he's not, then what's he been saying for the last 4 months? It doesn't make any sense. You've then got the idea that this whole boils down to we've got intelligence. It's what we were talking about before, Lee. It's starting to not particularly wash, because you're starting to have a situation whereby a couple of things one of a couple of things is happening. Either the United States has probably the most incredible, and I mean that in every sense of the word incredible, spying network that's ever been seen operating in Russia right now, or this is one of the most irresponsible public messaging campaigns that's ever been carried out. And we may never find out. We may find out in about 30 to 40 years' time exactly which one of those it was. I did notice that he didn't mention anything about that meeting between Sergei Lavrov and Antony Blinken. The fact that he didn't mention it would suggest that it's still happening. The fact that it hadn't been it wasn't him coming on to say that that's no longer the case. Diplomacy is going to happen until it doesn't happen. Yeah, I think at some point we will see some statements from the US and Russia next week. They probably should have happened this week. If they'd happened this week, I don't think we would have seen the situations we're seeing in the east of Ukraine that we're seeing right now.
Well, let me and Peter, thanks so much for staying on past the Biden thing. Appreciate it. But I know it's late there, so I'll let you go here in just 1 second. But let me mention one other thing to you in terms of the information space. It's a 3-day weekend here in the United States. Monday's a holiday. It's a federal holiday. It's President's Day. So in terms, and all of this is happening on a Friday afternoon, late afternoon, dinner time, starting to get towards dinner time. And we've learned that even though people should have longer attention spans, they don't. And so people aren't really going to be paying attention to this over the weekend, and it's really not going to pick up again until Tuesday here in the States for people to really pay attention. Mark, do you agree with my cynical comment? It shouldn't be this way. We have a 24-hour news cycle, but stuff seems to vanish over the weekend. Have you noticed that, Mark?
Well, of course, because, you know, it's first of all, it caters to our modern society, and second, it allows important things to be covered up by things that don't matter. I mean, for instance, all of this is about, what this is about is, let's say China takes over Panama. They buy it, do whatever, it's theirs, and now they start infiltrating Mexico. What is the United States going to have to say about that? And it is in the Russians' historical existential interest to worry about the West. Regardless of what you think about the Russian administration personally, it is a rational and pragmatic view to want to understand why the Russians feel scared when they have Westerners too close to their border.
Right, and of course you're talking to someone in my case who actually likes the Russian administration. The more I've researched, the more I like this administration, and I think Vladimir Putin has shown a great deal of patience. But Peter,
yes,
thanks so much for sticking through.
I can tell you a quick one about how Europeans get their messaging out. Just one that happened quickly when Sebastian Kurz, the last Austrian chancellor, when he decided he was going to quit before the scandals got too much. 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, that's when he decided to do it. And he announced straight away that his mate, who was the foreign minister at the time, that he would be taking over. By Monday morning, everybody had forgotten about it.
Let me ask you one more quick question, because I wanted to ask you this, then Joe Biden got in my way. There's been a lot of talk, I've seen it pick up in the U.S., about stopping Nord Stream 2. Let me ask you this practically. What can the U.S. actually do to stop Nord Stream 2 at this point? Peter?
Give us free liquefied natural gas and build send Ted Cruz over to build some regasification ports, regasification sites just to the west of Hamburg, east of Hamburg, and that'll probably work if he makes all that free. Without that, it's hard to see unless that gas is delivered at a discount. The Russian gas is needed in order to allow. It's without, you don't even have to get too technical. It's needed to allow stuff to work in Germany. It's needed to allow the power to stay on and the radiators to stay hot. Unfortunately, it has become so politicized. We most likely will see Nord Stream 2. When we see Nord Stream 2, I would not like to put any money on when that would happen. I thought the earliest we will see it will be the second half of this year. We have a very interesting and gymnastically, contortionistly put wording from the Chancellor Olaf Scholz that Germany will stop Nord Stream 2 if there is a full invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Now, full invasion, there would have to be Russian troops marching right up to the western border of Ukraine, I think, before Berlin would start going, all right, we're going to stop the project. It's not going to be pretty when it opens, but it will open, is still my opinion. There's still a lot of people that want to see it closed, but there is still no better option right now.
Peter Oliver, thanks so much for joining us. Have a great weekend. Avoid the hurricanes.
I'm off to Canada. I'm going to the truckers.
Wait, where are you going?
I'm going to Ottawa to the trucker convoy.
Oh, yeah. So we've had Austin Pelly up there doing a great job for us here at Sputnik. So you can tag in. Enjoy yourself in Canada.
Yeah, I'm going to try and catch up with him. But yeah, I'm heading up there tomorrow. I'll be on RT. Well, probably not tomorrow because it's about 20 hours of traveling I have ahead of me. But yeah, probably from late Sunday, Monday on RT. But yeah, RT International and RT.com, you can find me there.
There we go, Peter. And don't forget, marijuana is legal in Canada. I'm just saying. I'm not saying. I'm just saying. Peter Oliver, thanks so much for joining us. That was a great appearance by Peter Oliver, don't you think, Mark?
Yes, I do. It was interesting.
Always like having Peter on because he really knows quite a bit. And let's talk about this idea of, because I still want to talk to you about easing at some point, but you know, there's so much going on with Joe Biden suddenly speaking. The U.S. under Trump started doing a lot of sanctions. And I've argued that sanctions, and they're now talking about sanctioning Russia. They've reached bipartisan agreement that even if they don't invade, they're just going to sanction Russia. And Russia said rather bluntly earlier in the week, we poop. They didn't use that term. They say we poop on your sanctions. Now, without getting into that, the details of taking a bowel movement on sanctions and the effect that might have, do you view sanctions as a form of warfare, Mark?
Well, yes, and they can be because, so for instance, a embargo is absolutely an act of war. So, keeping somebody barricaded in the information world, trying to keep people out of the payment system and that sort of a thing could be considered an act of war. There's no doubt about it. It's war is nothing but the ultimate political choice, right? I mean, we go to war first when we think we can win, and two, when we think any political effort will be unsatisfactory. And so, I mean, that's what this is to me. Seems pretty simple.
Well, now, so let's turn to economics for a second. There's a couple of things I want to bring up with you, knowing it was Frosty Friday today. So one of them, I want to talk about Bitcoin a little bit. I've had a slight change of heart on Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies and NFTs.
I'm sorry.
My original...
I've lost you to the dark side.
Well, no, let me explain what my thinking is. Originally, I came from my libertarian roots and saw cryptocurrency as a reductio ad absurdum on fiat currency, basically. In other words, I was one of those people as libertarian, old school libertarian, who didn't like the idea that we'd gone off the gold standard or silver or any standard, straight fiat currency, and I thought it allowed all kinds of problems, and I still think that, but I don't see any serious move by anybody anywhere in the world, any government, to give up the idea of fiat currency.
Well, of course they're not going to, and it's just not going to happen, and it's the wet dream of the anarcho-capitalist that someday money itself, there'll be no God, no country, and money itself will be independent. It'll give you goosebumps up your arms if you're an anarcho-capitalist.
Well, see, this is the reason. So, and by the way, Ingrid, we'll get to you in just 1 second. 202-521-1320. So my thinking is, since fiat currency is not going away, that to me, 6 one, half dozen the other. I already see the problems with the current American system, with the currency. You know, we just print whatever we want to. And it seems to me that not all of them, and it seems to me that some forms of cryptocurrency are better or worse than others. But that the idea is, if you're not, since we're going to have fiat currency, that a more independent one, and Bitcoin or whatever seems like it may be that to me, is a more, it's less dependent on the Fed and an opaque process, let's say, and a little more open. So that's my slight change of heart on it. On NFTs, my change of heart has to do with realizing that lots of things in the world don't have intrinsic value. Art doesn't have intrinsic value. It's got value because people decide it's got value, if that makes sense, Mark. And like, why do Van Goghs occasionally go for millions of dollars? Is it because he's objectively a better painter than, let's say, Vermeer? I don't think so. And I'm not dissing Van Gogh. I'm just saying I think Vermeer is more technically impressive. But it's all arbitrary at a certain point. Does that make sense, Mark?
There's no more democratic an institution than a market.
Right. But that market is not, it's dependent on people's taste as much as anything. And so even if I look at NFTs and I go, well, that's silly, because it's, what are you doing? You're investing in, I realize you're investing in a pixel, but actually from listening to a lot of people talk about NFTs who are in that, you're sort of investing in an artist. Does that make sense?
No,
you're kind of,
but I know what you're trying to say.
Because you are kind of, because first off, the artists do end up making some money on it. And what you're doing in a sense is sponsoring something because of the blockchain that is a limited number. So there is, so that's part of the thing that gives things value.
So it's
scarcity.
So it's like getting a first edition Gene Simmons doll with a
that's
number
actually
on it.
That's actually a good example, because where I started to think about it was baseball cards. I don't care about baseball cards, but obviously, I was talking to my friend Jen about this. She said, like, Hummel figures, those little glass figures.
Yeah, I know them real well, because I have a whole bunch of them from my mom.
Okay, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. And your mom cared about them and loved them, but my guess is you personally aren't that into them. Am I right or wrong?
Don't care about them
at all?
I'm
not judging.
And all I was told my whole life is how they were worth so much.
And in fact, they can be, right? And you've learned that probably.
But not nearly as much as people think they're going to be. So.
No, well, that's true about a lot.
I mean, these are from 1950. And so just because it's old doesn't mean that it's going to command a great price. It's supply and demand, right?
It is. And the supply part, the thing about NFTs, because it's on the blockchain, the supply is limited because there's only so many that are minted, to use the NFT term. And so if you say there's only 10 of these pixels, that's it. There's 10 of them. And we have an objective way through the blockchain to know that this one is one of the 10.
But there still has to be an initial utility. So there has to be a reason to want it in the first place. So there has to have been some work somewhere in the background, somewhere.
No, I agreed. And that's why I say that's where the artist and the artwork itself of creating it. Just because it's the form it's taking is a digital form.
Yes, but my problem in all of these discussions is people call them a cryptocurrency. They're not a currency. In fact, Bitcoin, the most prominent one, is not a good currency. In fact, the best phrase for them is their digital assets. And that's, because they're not money. I mean, it's using Bitcoin to buy a shirt or a Coke is still a pretty poor methodology.
And by the way, NFTs and cryptocurrency are related, kind of, but they're distinct things. NFTs are more like a product, end product that's not even claiming to be a currency. But because it's tied into certain cryptos, like the Ethereum thing, but it doesn't have to be. It's just it's a product. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. It's a product. I could get, Carl Palmer does them himself. He issues them. And people that love Carl Palmer buys his art. And they support him, and that's part of the utility function is I get a warm fuzzy out of helping Carl Palmer.
And that's why I was saying to you earlier.
Whether I love his artwork or not, I'm going to do this because the work he has put in over the last 50 years is amazing, and I want to commemorate it with something silly and specious like an NFT.
And that's why I said I've come to realize that you're supporting the artist as much as the work. It's exactly what you just said. I've come to realize that a lot of people supporting NFTs, they're supporting the artist, and that gets into a whole aesthetic discussion we can talk about maybe at some point. But always a great discussion.
I mean, mostly what they're supporting is greed, because that's how the system works, is greed. People buy it not because it provides any utility for them per se. They buy it because they believe that the price is going to increase. That's why it's Dutch tulips. That's what it is. People buy them because lots of people are buying them.
It's that for some people, because there's investors, but there's also people who are collectors, and there's a distinction in the NFT world.
Same thing.
It kind of, not necessarily. I know what you're saying.
As long as you're collecting scarce items. I mean, if you're collecting pigeon poop at the park, that might be an exception. But if you're managing something that's scarce already and trying to make it either less or more scarce, I think that drives the nail right into it.
Well, I think there is a distinction, and I think as part of what it has to do with is an investor doesn't really care too much about the aesthetic element of something. They more care whether they're going to make money or not. Whereas collectors, they care less about whether they're going to make money. And the pure aesthetic element may be something. I saw this with my dad, who was a golf collector, and he would trade stuff back and forth. But you know this, Mark, from your own interests and stuff. Whether some things are valuable to you, independent of whether it's the rarest thing. It's interesting to you because you're interested in Carl Palmer or whatever. But I've got to make sure we get to the calls, 202-521-1320. Ingrid, thanks for holding on there. Dan, we'll get to you in just 1 second. Ingrid, what is on your mind?
So the Nord Stream, some people have taken Biden's statements as a threat of some kind of literal sabotage of that pipeline should anything happen and should they not be able to press everybody. But Peter Lavelle, not Peter Lavelle, whoever you had on, he really surprised me. I knew that
Peter Oliver.
I knew that Ted Cruz is a gas bag, but I didn't realize he could supply all of Europe.
Well, I thought, because Ted's been one of those people yapping about Nord Stream. I think Peter was making a joke there, just saying, basically, there's no way the U.S. can do anything unless they want to give out free gas. I thought that was if I can destroy his joke by explaining it. I think that's what he was saying. You got that right, Ingrid?
I thought he wasn't joking. I thought he, anyway.
No, I think he was joking. Mark, do you have a judgment call on that?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you think he was making a joke about Ted Cruz there? Is that how you took it?
I kind of gave up trying to understand Ted Cruz a long time ago. His emotion scale is kind of limited, and he's a little creepy to me just in general. And I thought he was being tongue-in-cheek, making a joke, but who knows?
Yeah, no, I thought so too. Anyway, Ingrid, anything else?
Well, what do you think of the possibility of Biden sabotaging the Nord Stream?
I don't think that's possible. I don't think he would do that.
Well, in a way, he has done that. I don't mean sabotaging it with a military weapon, but he has said, if you invade Ukraine, I will spoil the deal of Nord Stream. And so he has tried to imply that there is a poison pill involved here, and that, so in a way, that's exactly what he has been doing. And I mean, this is game theory at the international political level. And Russia believes that Ukraine should not be in NATO. And we apparently believe that Ukraine should be in NATO. And that's the essential argument. Russia doesn't want another NATO member east. And if you look at their history, that's a reasonable thing for a country like Russia to be concerned about. There's many things that I would talk with anybody from the Russian government about my gripes and the things that I think that they dropped the ball on. But every country has a right to protect itself. In fact, that's the number one reason to have a country, is to prevent yourself from being invaded. And Russia does have has a track record with the West invading them.
Okay, let me just say one thing, and then I want to go to Dan in California, right, Saul? That's the Dan we're talking about?
No, Dan in Montana.
Dan in Montana, okay. Different. Dan in Montana, we'll get to you. This Dan, I'm thinking of Dave in California, forgive me. I was close in the first two letters. But Dan in Montana, we'll go to you in just one quick second. But let me just say something. This may be very controversial with Mark Frost. I have a vibe that if you and I were talking to Ted Cruz, just hanging out with him over a couple of beers, my guess is Ted Cruz is a Rush fan, the Canadian power trio Rush. Do you get that vibe at all, Mark?
You know, it's possible. I don't think he's fan? No. Maybe someone who appreciates a couple of their songs. I'll buy that. I don't see him as a Rush fan.
Okay, you like super fan. You're talking like.
Well, I think I'm old school. I think to be a fan, to be a true fan of a progressive rock band, you have to have done acid to them.
Well, yeah, and Ted, look, he's rocking that mullet. I'll just leave it right there. 202-521-1320. Dan in Montana, thanks for holding. What's on your mind?
Hey, so I think you make a good point about how people don't want to give up fiat currency, and that's going to make it really hard for something like Bitcoin, and definitely hard for one of the others to become a standard currency. But I think there's a couple different scenarios where it's not a completely crazy idea. The first one is if a country is being pressured and over-leveraged by the World Bank or some other institution, like Argentina or Greece, or a big example is Iran. They like to talk about how, Bitcoin's just used for illegal things like drugs and I don't know, pornography or something, but they don't talk about a sanctioned country suddenly forced to adopt it. And the other scenario, and maybe you guys could just riff on this, is if the United States or another country suddenly was forced to adopt special drawing rights, I think that changes the whole equation. And Mark might know a lot better than that.
Well, and unfortunately, we'll have to riff on that with Mark next week because we're about out of time and we got Ian Schilling online. So, Mark, do you have any quick thoughts on that before we go to break here?
Yes. I think that crypto is a good asset to have. I think that there's many arguments that people are wanting a digital money, a digital currency. We just don't have any right now. Most of my precautionary money against inflation is in gold and silver. But I believe in crypto. I believe in I have my toe in the water. But I would be very careful for listeners out there getting crypto fever because more people lose than they win.
Okay, so I'm just saying, to be clear, Ted Cruz is the kind of Rush fan whose favorite song is Tom Sawyer. I'm just saying, that's about as deep into the catalog as he may get. But I'm still going to hold to that until I know differently. Coming right up, straight out of the UK, we're going to close the week before we go into a 3-day weekend, which could be rollicking. It's going to be quite a show on Tuesday. Take my word for it, because there's a lot going on right now, and it's not even Friday night. Ian Schilling is joining us right after this break on the best damn radio show in the world. I'm Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want the report.
Let's talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back, 105.5 FM, AM 1390 in Washington, D.C. It is a frosty Friday. Our friend Mark Frost is joining us as the able co-host, doing a great job. It's always fun to talk to Mark. In fact, Mark, let me just say this. I kind of felt like we're in our, we're hanging out. Me, you, Peter comes over. That was fun, right? And then the creepy, weird neighbor, the old guy, Biden, shows up banging on the door and kind of changes the vibe of the party. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, I kind of felt that way. But now to bring the vibe back, straight out of the UK, great friend of the show, Ian Schilling is joining us. Hey, Ian, how you doing?
Hi, guys. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, no, let me talk about... I'm finding there's new politicians in the UK I don't like. And let me explain who the newest one is this Liz Truss woman, the foreign minister.
Dear.
And I started not to like her when I first saw her. It wasn't at sight. It's when she started yapping. When she started talking, she was doing a event with Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister for Russia. And Liz Truss got up there, and she seems like she's in over her head, among other things.
I
and
think
she's
you're
mouthing.
being very polite there. She is completely clueless.
Okay, see, this is why we love you, Ian. So go ahead. So bash away at Liz Truss. Tell us all about
Truss believes every neocon propaganda going. Right? She's a total neocon. Right? She believes all the war propaganda and everything about Russia is all these evil empires seeking to take over the world. Right? When in reality, it's the US and the British that are trying to take over the world and are trying to antagonise and provoke conflict and war in Ukraine as a method of getting to Russia. And Liz Truss is a complete bloody idiot. She has less than zero knowledge about world affairs or geopolitics or anything that's going on in the world. That's why the Mandarins in Whitehall, right, the Mandarins in the Foreign Office in Whitehall, the senior civil servants who do know what the British government are intending to do, because that's what they're doing, and they've just appointed a complete stooge who knows nothing about world affairs. Right? So the evil scumbags in Whitehall, in the British Foreign Office, who have been trying to provoke conflict and war with Russia for the last 60 years, right? 70 years away, since 1948. How long is that? 70 years ago, right? So she's just a stooge. She's a puppet who knows absolutely nothing. She's completely clueless about everything. Right? So they got her with a picture of a tank with some lopsided helmet on that Peter Hitchens from the Daily Mail described as she was wearing a tortoise on her head, because that's what she looked like, completely ridiculous, totally warmongering. And then she went to meet Russia. She went to Russia and met Lavrov. And Lavrov has been in the diplomatic service in Russia for the last 40 years or something, right? So Lavrov is probably the most clued up diplomat in the entire world, right? He's been a senior Russian diplomat for the last 40 years. At the end of the last Cold War, he was in the Russian Foreign Office, and he survived the changeover to non-communism, and is now the Russian foreign minister. Right? Lavrov is probably the most experienced and knowledgeable diplomat in the entire world, I would say. Right? The Americans haven't got anywhere near that, and all the Americans are totally clueless. All the British are totally clueless. All the Europeans are totally clueless. I mean, Lavrov is probably... I mean, I respect Lavrov, whatever he says. So I might not agree with everything he says, but I respect him. So
let me ask you this.
Went to Moscow and he got totally outshone by Lavrov, unsurprisingly, because Lavrov knows what he's doing and Liz Truss doesn't.
Well, I just found out something interesting that I didn't know, that Tony Blinken, our Secretary of State here in the United States, apparently, I've not looked this up yet, so I could be half wrong on some of this, but I understand that his stepfather was an attorney of some kind for Robert Maxwell. Have you heard that?
No, I haven't heard that, but he's of Ukrainian descent. Right, so he's on the Western Ukrainian side, right? He's got Western Ukrainian ancestors, right? And he's a Jew, right? So he's on Kiev's side, right? He's a total neocon, right? It doesn't matter whether he's a member of the Democrat Party. He's a total neocon nutjob, warmongering nutjob, right? Blinken is a total idiot who hasn't got a clue what's going on in the world. right? Which is the problem that the Americans have had for the last 40 years. I mean, Nixon and Kissinger knew what was going on in the world in the 1970s, didn't they? Because Nixon and Kissinger decided that Nixon should go to China, to Beijing in 1972 to strike up a deal with China and drive a wedge between the Communist Party in Beijing and the Communist Soviet Union in Moscow, right? So 40 years ago, or nearly 50 years ago now, in 1972, Richard Nixon went to Beijing to drive a wedge between China and Russia, didn't he? It was very successful because China and Russia, after he went to visit, hated each other. And they were absolute enemies. Russia and China after Nixon went to China, were absolute enemies, right? So Nixon and Kissinger actually knew what they were doing, right? Because that was a perfect scenario. Get Russia and China to fight each other. What is the current situation? What have the neocons done for the last 20 or 30 years? They have forced China and Russia to be absolute partners and absolute allies, haven't they, in everything? And it's a perfect match now, isn't it, between Russia and China? Because China's got all the manpower with 1.4 billion people and all the manufacturing capacity that they're shipping out to America. Right, so they've got all the finance, right? They've got trillions of dollars of exports, or billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars of exports to the US. And they've got all this manpower that can make anything that they want. And Russia's got all the oil and gas and the weapons expertise that China needs. Because China hasn't got any oil and gas, so it's got coal. It hasn't got any oil and gas. And it didn't have weapons expertise. So Russia is supplying all the weapons expertise and is supplying all the oil and gas to China. So it's a perfect symbiotic relationship between Russia and China. And the neocons have forced them to become allies because actually Russia and China are ideologically opposed, right? Because Russia is what used to be America in the 1950s. Putin is more like American politicians in the 1950s, right? So he supports family values, right? He doesn't support massive immigration. He supports Russian stability and protecting the national borders, right? So he doesn't allow hordes of refugees to come across the borders, like Biden allows hordes of refugees to come across Mexico. Right? So Putin has got more in common with the 1950s or 1960s Republican supporter in America than anyone else. Right? He's got more in common with the ordinary GOP supporter in America than the GOP politicians like Mitt Romney or Mitch McConnell or who's the leader in the rep? Kevin
McCarthy.
McCarthy, that's it. Yeah. So Putin's got more in common with the Republican base than any of the top GOP Republicans, right? Mitch McConnell, Mitt Romney, Kevin McCarthy, all that lot, they're all rhinos, aren't they? They're not really Republicans. They don't support conservative values or family values or low taxes or small government or anything, do they?
They certainly don't support small government. I think that's a great analysis, actually. And it's one of the reasons I've said, and I like, having studied Putin, I like Putin quite a bit. And it's basically for the reasons that you say. And I don't think I'm alone. I think the average, as you say, GOP person, but the average Republican supporter likes Putin from what they know, and they're heavily propagandized against him. Now, I want to ask you, since I brought up Maxwell, I want to talk about Prince Andrew in 1 second. But Mark Frost, Ian Schilling's on the line. Do you have any questions for Ian about anything? He was What do you think of his analysis of American politics and also what Nixon and Kissinger did with Russia and China, Mark?
I agree with it very much. In fact, if you remember last week, I pointed out that Mongolia actually petitioned the Soviet Union for admittance because they were worried about China, and the Soviet Union turned them down. They didn't want them to be part of the Soviet Union because they wanted that buffer to protect themselves. That's what I'm talking about. When Russia thinks about protecting itself, it does so with other buffers. And when it's lost those buffers, it's paid the price. And so there is reasoned rationality going on in this.
Yeah, Ian, any comments on what Mark's saying there?
Yeah, he's totally correct. I mean, Russian politics and Putin is driven by hard facts and aims, but the American politicians are aimed. It's totally political. It's what they can point score with their domestic audience. So it's not Putin's strategy is what is best for Russia, right? And Xi's strategy is basically what is best for China. But American policy is what is best for the current party. Right? It's not best for America. Right? Pelosi and Schumer and Biden are not doing what is best for America. They're trying to point score off the GOP. And all the GOP leadership, Mitch McConnell and all that lot, are trying to point score off the Democrats. They're not doing what's best. Neither of them are doing what's best for America. I mean, Trump had sort of the best idea, right? But he didn't. He never went about it in the right way. But he had the best idea. He tried to marginalise China because China is obviously a threat to America and to American jobs and prosperity. It's obvious that China is a threat to American prosperity. So he tried to marginalise and reduce China's power. Now, he didn't go about it in the right way, and he didn't have any success in doing it, but he was sort of on the right track, okay?
Now Mark, any thoughts on that? Do you think China did represent a threat to American prosperity, Mark, for us?
Well, yeah. I mean, and he makes a great point when he talks about they even had a name for it back in the day. It was called triangulation. Nixon triangulated China and Russia against each other and pulled off a foreign policy, wet dream, basically.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Yeah, Nixon pulled off a foreign policy wet dream. Right? And then what happened? The elder Bush and Clinton negotiated NAFTA, the globalist trade deal, which was all for corporations against American jobs. And then Clinton pushed for China to be accepted into the World Trade Organization, which is where all China's wealth has come from. Because if China wasn't in the World Trade Organization, it wouldn't be able to export tariff-free to Europe and America, which is where all China's prosperity has come from. China would be still nothing if Clinton hadn't let them into the WTO. It would be nothing, because they would have all had 30% or 50% tariffs on all Chinese goods. So they would have been, it would have been impossible for China to grow anywhere near as fast as it has over the last 30 years.
Also, there was a guy that ran for president named Ross Perot that had a lot to say about that,
and he was against it, yes. If Perot had been elected president, the whole world would have been different, yes.
And he's as close as any independents come. Now, let me ask you this, Ian, because I know you'll give it to us straight. You brought up Clinton, who's a Rhodes Scholar. And in the research I've done, I'm a little suspicious of Oxford. I'm just going to be blunt. I've noticed that Oxford comes up in globalist circles constantly, the different colleges at Oxford. And I've been to Oxford because I wanted to see it for myself. I even got a mug from that. I don't have it with me. But what the hell's going on with Oxford, Ian Schilling? There's something kind of suspicious and creepy about Oxford.
You are
Am I correct?
Correctly. You are completely correct. Oxford is one of the leading indoctrination centres for the globalist takeover by oligarchs. Right? It's a total indoctrination centre, like Harvard in the US. It's the equivalent of Harvard in the US for indoctrination to globalism. And globalism is the total takeover by mega corporations and global oligarchs like George Soros and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, right? All that lot, all the Davos and all the WAF oligarchs. It's a total indoctrination centre. It's totally against British interests and ordinary British people. I mean, I regard British interests as the interests of the 90% of ordinary Brits, right? That's what I define British interests as, right? That's not what Oxford University defines it as. Oxford University defines the British interest as the interest of the British oligarchs, right? So the Duke of Westminster or the royal family who owned loads of shares in mega corporations, or the City of London, which is all the mega bankers and whatever. That's what the Oxford University defines British interests as, which is nothing to do with it. Right? Or Cecil Rhodes, right? Cecil Rhodes, right, who was the South African oligarch who made an absolute fortune with diamond mines in South Africa and Rhodesia, right? Johannesburg. He wanted to take over the world for the benefit of oligarchs like himself, right? This was in 1890s and 1900. Cecil Rhodes is the root of all the globalism, right? Cecil Rhodes didn't want benefits to ordinary people. He wanted the oligarchs to control the entire world. This is where globalism starts from. Cecil Rhodes and his round tables and Lord Rothschild. Right,
Natty, you're talking about Natty Rothschild. Old school Rothschilds. And they've still got the statue of Cecil Rhodes up at Oxford over there. Yeah. The thing I didn't realize, have you been over to Oxford, Mark?
I haven't.
Okay. So one of the things I didn't realize till I got there and was researching it, you may know this because you're an educated man, Mark. Me, I'm an idiot. But when I got over there, I realized that Oxford is not, it's different than Harvard structurally. Let me explain. Oxford is a bunch of different colleges. I don't even know how many, but there's a bunch of different colleges that all make up Oxford. Does that make sense, Mark?
Mm-hmm.
And so
there's about 30.
Harvard,
there's about 30. Right, there's 30 odd Oxford colleges. Yes, they're all supposedly independent. Yes.
Yes, and so I didn't know it's like a hive of Harvards, right? You know what I'm saying? It's like, imagine if you went to Harvard and you saw it was a bunch of globalist community colleges all stuck together. So there's a central part of Oxford where the mall is a big mall there now, and there's a downtown area like a lot of, I saw all over England. But then there's the different colleges, and one of them is called University College, which would confuse the hell out of me. You see what I'm saying, Mark? If someone said, "Where'd you go?" and you said, "I went to College University," that would confuse people, wouldn't it?
Maybe.
They think you were
probably just because I understand it. I don't know.
They think you were stuttering. Now, let's talk about the Royals for a second.
But the main point, Lee, but the main point is that all these 30-odd Oxford colleges all have dons that think the same way and all been trained by other dons, previous dons that all think the same way. And they all stem from donations by wealthy benefactors, right? Industrialists, right? All the Oxford colleges have been started or funded by billionaires, right? Or, billionaires in their day, whether they were merchants in 1700s England that started at Oxford College, or whether they were Cecil Rhodes, right? They were all billionaire oligarchs, right? That's what.
So let's bring that to today's benefactors, which would be Jeff Epstein. Would certainly be he was spreading around a lot of money, and we just had this past week Prince Andrew. You've heard of him, from the royal family. He reached an agreement with Virginia Giuffre. Now, I went out on a limb here on the show, Ian, and I said that I thought that his settlement out of court, even though we're never going to hear any more details, because once they settle out of court, everyone signs something that they won't say anything publicly. But I think that means that obviously Prince Andrew was guilty. Is that the impression people have there in the UK, that he was guilty?
Yes. It's an admission of guilt. Otherwise, he wouldn't have paid out £12 million for a non-disclosure deal. Yes. The amount varies, but it's about 10 to $20 million, 10 to $16 million to shut Victoria Giuffre up, isn't it? So she can't speak about it anymore.
That's right. And he thought, Prince Andrew thought Koo Stark was expensive. Ha-ha. No, you're wrong. So here's what I want to ask, because the other thing I've heard is the Queen, who's older now, she's towards the end of her life, right? I mean, I'm not hoping that on anybody.
She's 95. She's not going to live much longer. Yes.
She's no spring chicken, and she was talking about maybe Camilla taking over. But do you think the royals are in real trouble? Do you think the royal family is in any real danger of just going away with all the stuff that's going on?
Not at the moment, but Prince Charles is a complete bloody idiot. So if,
I always viewed Prince Charles the way that I viewed...
It's supposed to be transferred to him. If he gets in power for 5 years, I think the monarchy collapse.
Okay, go ahead, Mark. What were you saying?
Oh, I was just kind of reiterating what he was saying. In that sense, it's... I agree. I've never completely understood the monarchy anyway. I mean, I've certainly read and studied and that I understand intellectually, but I don't get the emotional value that my Brit friends have toward the monarchy. It's just, to me, I don't get it. But I go to the UK probably at least once a year, and I've been doing that for over 20 years, and it seems like that's getting a little bit less true every trip.
Yes.
Are you noticing that the people are the people who have had a warm place in their heart for the royal family, in a sense, a patriotic sense, is that diminishing in your opinion, Ian? Before we leave here?
Definitely, yes. Support for the royal family is going down drastically. I mean, if you'd have asked ordinary Brits if they supported the royal family 20 years ago or 30 years ago, they would have been, 90% or something. Now it might be 60%, right? So it's down a third or something. It's definitely gone down drastically. I mean, the royal family is a tool of oppression by the British establishment. Right? It's a tool to control people. Right?
And Ian, we have to end it on that note of repression, because we're out of time on the best damn radio show in the world. Thanks so much to Ian Schilling. Great appearance by Ian. Thanks so much, Peter Oliver. Great job, Mark Frost, co-hosting. Thanks to our multifaceted engineer, Saul. Thanks to our producer, Rod from Philly. And I'll tell you, when Queen Elizabeth passed away at the royal funeral, if Johnny Lydon sings, it's all over. I'm going to leave it on that. Okay, everyone, we'll talk to you next Tuesday. Try not to invade anyone this weekend. We'll talk to you on Tuesday. Signing off from The Backstory.